Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. And each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry, and today we're joined by a remarkable guest, Vicki Knott, who is CEO and co-founder at Crux OCM. Vicki, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Doing well. It is early on my side of the pond.
Yeah, nice and bright and early. I'm sure early starts are commonplace for you, not so much for me. But for those people who don't know you, Vicki, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company that you work at?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO and co-founder at Crux OCM. And effectively what we've built, the easiest way to describe it to folks not in the industry is autonomous driving capabilities, but for operating pipelines. So multi-billion-dollar infrastructure that powers our entire economy. So they're operated in central control rooms, think like NASA, or think like a pilot in a cockpit. We've developed software to enable the autonomous operation of those assets, but with humans in the loop. So creating, increasing the energy available to consumers with our existing assets and doing that at a lower energy consumption.
Is that something that you've always been interested in, or did you just kind of like fall into it somewhere?
A little bit of both. So started out, actually I'm a chemical engineer. And I started in pulp and paper, which was super fun. And I did that just because my dad was in the forestry world. And so that made sense. But I loved the complexity of the heavy machinery and like just the heavy industrial environment kind of as was. So I was in Canada. That's where I'm from. I'm from like a really small community there. And like at the time, pulp and paper was kind of like a plateauing industry. But in Canada, oil and gas was really, really picking up. So I wanted to get into that sector specifically and got my first job in there. I actually trained as a control room operator for 8 months for the largest batched oil pipeline in the world, the Keystone pipeline. So that's how I got into the space. And that's how I was like, okay, so I've seen technology in pulp and paper, heavy industrial, that's much more advanced than our most modern pipeline infrastructure in the world. Something's a little off here, right? Like I think we can do better.
Do you have like an entrepreneurial background? Was it something that you thought, oh, actually, I'd like to be an entrepreneur when I grow up? Or is it something that you kind of like have like a networking? Or what was the influence? What caused you to go into entrepreneurship?
Excellent question. So I think I know I've read a bunch of stuff on like how entrepreneurship is in your DNA. So my family are all fishermen. So I think they're all solopreneurs, small inshore fishing boats, all ran their own mini businesses. So I think from a personality and a heritage standpoint, I didn't really know that I had like entrepreneur DNA, but apparently I did. So going into, when I was working in oil pipelines, I found myself miserable as an engineer. I was like, why don't I like this? I was like, I don't understand. And so I actually did career counseling and did a bunch of like psychological assessments. So a bit of a different entrepreneurial journey than people are used to hearing, because people are used to hearing that, oh, I was selling lemonade stands on the side of the road. No, I didn't do any of that. I had a bunch of psychological assessments that all cross-correlated and indicated that I was definitely in the wrong profession for my personality type and my strengths. And so fun fact was at the time, I'd already been working on the idea for the business for Crux, and I'd already identified how it could work, like what the product would look like. But I was almost in like denial that this was a career path that I could actually take.
So could you just tell us a little bit about your company, Crux OCM, like a bit of the journey and just how the company came into existence?
Yeah. So I was training as a control room operator. I was working at commissioning valves in the field, so like 32-inch heavy industrial, like massive equipment, variable frequency drives that operate pumps the size of my office. I was doing all of this stuff, and I had come to the realization that the automation capabilities in the sector were nowhere near other sectors. And I had heard of this guy named Roger Shirt who was doing like advanced process control or process control work in the space. And so I, hunted him down, got an introduction to him. And he and I just hit it off. So we did really cool projects for about 5 years. while I was still an employee, like huge ROI, like, 4 million a year off of a 60,000 capital expenditure, like just huge ROIs because it's such an underserved space with regards to advanced automation. So I started pitching him on that he and I should work together. At the same time I was doing the career counseling, I was actually going to take over his consulting business. But yeah, I went on a holiday, sat on a beach for 3 weeks and called Roger and said, hey, I think we should start a software company. At the time, though, I'd never heard of venture capital. I'd never heard of Silicon Valley. I'd never even heard of startups because yes, it's software, but it's software that's still on-prem. It's probably the last frontier because it's heavy industrial software, right? Like it's essentially the operating systems or the firmware for these big multi-billion assets. So it's almost like the last frontier. And so we didn't know the broader software ecosystem. We just knew enough to be dangerous to write some code.
Were there any skills that you got during your earlier career that actually have been really useful for you since you become a co-founder and a CEO?
Oh, that is a great question. That's where I think I'll default back to. I believe actually that entrepreneurship's a personality type. I think the skills that I got were much more tactical skills of like the knowledge, right? It's like, okay, I know inside out and backwards how the midstream and commodities market works, right? So that I think is what was extremely valuable because it's like, I happen to have an entrepreneurial personality, but I was in a space that was just ripe for innovation, right?
So that kind of process that you go through, was it kind of like influenced by other people, or was it kind of like a self-realization, a bit of an epiphany moment that made you go?
Totally self-realization.
Really?
Totally epiphany. Yeah, I was like, okay, I guess I should probably really do this because this is a huge opportunity. This is a huge market. I seem to have, like, Roger and I seem to have way more insight on this than anyone else. Like, the industry needs this so bad, it's almost silly. And so we couldn't not do it. Was really what it boiled down to. and the astronomical, like the ROIs for the industry, just to put the magnitude in, is like for every, like when we're increasing barrels per hour on pipelines that are feeding refineries, that actually increases their top line revenue generation by up to 30%. That's in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year. So it's like the opportunity here for these clients and just to make it easier for these people to operate these assets. I think driving your autonomous car with driver assistance versus like your stick shift, right? It's like, well, let's give them driver assistance. And then they can get that much more efficient. We can get that much more utilization out of the assets, which equates to a lot of dollars.
Is that what really excites you, the innovation, the drive? Because when I hear you talking, I can obviously hear the passion about it. Is that what drives you? Is that what gets you up in the morning?
No, what gets me up in the morning is the simplification of it all. In the heavy industrial software space, I believe that it's been architected for the wrong end user. It's been architected for the engineers, right? But the actual people that operate heavy industrial assets are control room operators. And so the fact that we need to redesign for the correct end user and simplify that workflow to take out all of this nonsense that's just destroying value, like that to me is very exciting.
So since we're on the topic of this, like what kind of tech trends are currently catching your attention within the industry? And if there are any, what are their driving factors?
Right, yeah. So I was trying to give like a little bit of background on like what, like kind of what the space is and so what the trends you would see. So what we're seeing now is an understanding around that on-prem is not superior, right? Like if you look at the banking industry, right? Like all of our, like that's our most important data. It is managed with cloud technology and advanced, new stuff. So having a rack of servers that you own yourself in your heavy industrial space just it's not making sense anymore. And so what we're seeing is a willingness to get away from that. And we're seeing that mostly, I think, because our products offer such a compelling event of revenue generation that then these clients want 4 nines of uptime. And if you're an on-prem with your own servers that you're keeping up, you're not going to get 4 nines of uptime. It's not possible. Right? Like you don't have the staff, the team to keep it going. So that's a trend that we're starting to see in the heavy industrial space. People are finally starting to get it. And I know this might sound boring to most listeners because they're like, oh, every other industry's done this. Yes, but this is like the last frontier, right? And if we want to get to true industrial autonomy, we have to re-architect the entire thing. And we haven't even started yet.
How do you apply this like across the board? Do you go in on a small granular level or are you going like large scale? What's your focus point first?
We are large scale. So our client that is public with us in the public domain is Phillips 66. So they are a large midstream operator in the U.S. I think they're number 9 or 16 or something on the Fortune 500. Just a 50 plus billion market cap company. I like to say we hunt whales. So another client that's public with us is One Oak. They're even bigger. So we're coming in and right now like landing on one asset or one pipeline and deploying for our clients to operate one of their like one pipeline asset and proving out like the proof of value, right? Like, is it generating the revenue that you're expecting it to generate? So we have a really cool thing where we can actually take your historical average flow rate and get your new flow rate after you've installed our software. We can subtract the two and have a quantifiable ROI, like a very hard ROI, which I know with some software companies can be very difficult to achieve.
So anyone who watches this channel knows I always complain when I ask that question and people always talk about AI. But since you bucked the trend and haven't asked about AI, is there any application for AI, any room for AI to be involved in this improvement process?
But the thing is like what I was alluding to before is in this space, there's everything still on-prem, which means you don't have access to high compute. You need high compute to be able to enable LLMs and AI. So right now, the current heavy industrial architecture, it's impossible to get to industrial autonomy. Like you can't do it. You can't introduce LLMs. Like you can try, but like you need to bring a chip on site. You need to bring the GPU capacity on site. That's not being done yet either, right? So there, the opportunity there is huge for AI to start being useful. Where I see AI being the most useful is currently the databases for this type of process data. So heavy industrial data, it's all numbers, right? You're getting pressures, flows, all this stuff. All of that's currently in servers on-prem as well and proprietary. So you can't get access to any of it. So the compute needs to be in place and the infrastructure needs to be in place in these environments in order for AI to even be leveraged. And those things aren't even there yet. So I think also what I'm seeing too, I'm going to finish. I have no run out. Wait a second. I have another one. Yeah. So where I think it will be the most, what we're doing and where we want it to be the most useful is you have these on-prem environments and like right now you can't ask the data questions, right? Like that's what people want to be able to do. Like, well, what was my flow rate last week? And what's my target, like actual versus planned? So my goal and our goal as a company is like, okay, let's connect these things. And we're partnered with Microsoft. They led our last round of financing to actually be able to create the infrastructure required such that these massive industrial data sets can be leveraged in an easier way. And you can actually apply an LLM to them. Right now, you can't. Like, it's like, it just doesn't exist.
Are there any other primary focal points or ongoing projects or endeavors that are particularly exciting for you at the moment?
Yeah, so we call it MiniBot, which is literally the capability to ask the system what it's doing. So imagine if your car is driving autonomously for you and like you don't have any visual as to why it's taking the route it's taking, but then it tells you like, oh, I went this way because it's faster by these few minutes, right? So essentially what we're doing is opening up the black box, and in heavy industry, that's extremely important because people need to know what's happening. So we're opening up the black box such that as PipeBot, our product, is executing and operating on behalf of the control room operator, the control room operator can find out, well, what did it do and why did it do that? And then that data can then be filtered into a database that has access for the rest, the other executives, that the other executives can get real-time information on what's actually happening on their asset. Think of it like you're Amazon and you don't have real-time inventory tracking. That's the reality right now in these assets.
Could you just tell me a little bit about how you keep up to date with the latest developments? Is your field like a particularly rapid pace change industry, or is it rather
it's the slowest in the world? We're the last. We're like the slowest there is. It's okay, right? Because it's like if you think of it, energy underpins our entire economy. Like we need the stability and the robustness in those systems and those infrastructures. So it's okay if they're laggards, right? Like, I don't think we need to be upset with it. It's like, okay, but now that everyone's getting really far ahead, we need to catch up a little, right?
So I suppose the answer to that question is very easily. You keep up to date very easily because you're probably the ones driving the change, isn't it? So if I think about your business, like, do you have competitors? And if you do, what is the difference between you and them?
Yeah, so Blue Ocean, so the differentiation is actually quite challenging. And that's because, folks are trying to pattern match you to something, but there isn't anything. So it's the easiest we can pattern match to is, okay, you guys have a version of this technology in refining and chemicals. So, we're over here. We're doing the same idea. The big incumbents, the big control systems guys, like we're friends with them all. Like so, Aviva, Schneider Electric, like we integrate with them. ABB, like all of those folks are the ones who could be working into this space, but it seems to be a significant gap in the market.
And when I'm talking to you, and I think it's probably clear from anyone watching and listening to this, that you are a really excitable and passionate person. It seems like you're really motivated, but is it always the case that you're motivated? And how do you maintain that level of motivation, particularly if it's a challenging time or things aren't going quite the way that you envisaged?
Yes, that is always a great question. I think like the fact that I enjoy like the core of what we're doing, which is the simplification. Like I enjoy that so much that it makes it a lot easier. And I also go with like the 80-20 rule, right? Like if it's fun 80% of the time, like I'm doing fine. And you just have to remember that in the 20. And yeah, and I have to say, like for me, this is the best job I've ever had. Because 80% of the time I love it. Right. And I don't think it gets much better than that.
Could you apply that same enthusiasm to a completely different field, or is it the field in combination with the simplification of the process that you actually enjoy?
I think it's right now the field combined with the simplification, because the field is like heavy physics, heavy mathematics. Like it's like, and I enjoy all of that as a chem engineer. So I think that the space itself, I really enjoy the deep complexity. So like the deep tech space is super interesting to me. I enjoy thinking in the abstract. So yeah, so I think that I'd want to stay in this space no matter what. Kind of like it here.
If you look over your career, what would you say has been the most like unexpected challenge that you faced?
Oh, I would say the most unexpected challenge that I've faced is people's inability to identify their own struggles, right? Like people will, you're hiring for a role, or someone wants a promotion, and they will look you dead in the eye and they will believe it that they can really do that role. And then they'll be in the role for 6 months to a year and they're failing miserably, but they will look you in the eye and they believe they're really succeeding at that role. And I found that was like what I found so shocking is like just the sheer number of people that I've encountered that don't have an idea that like, no, this isn't working. Like you're supposed to do this, but you're doing this, and they just don't see the difference. I think that's been the people side of it. Having been like this super candid, of course, of me, but like having come from a junior engineer from the field, like that was extremely shocking to me.
How do you find like people managing? Do you find like you really enjoy it, or is that something? Are you more like process and details focused?
I'm actually I enjoy the people side of it, but I very much, my favorite business books are actually War Fighting and Team of Teams. So my philosophy is very much not command and control. And so that doesn't work for everyone, even though they love the ideation of Team of Teams. Folks are, if they've only ever experienced command and control, they don't know how to adapt to that environment. So I think if people are in the team environment, I love the management there.
And when you're looking for people, when you're talking about like management, what kind of qualities are you looking for? What are the definites that you have to have, and what are the things that maybe you think, that's an okay quality, but it's not really going to make you stand out?
And for like leadership talent specifically,
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think the is bad. Like I know it's cliche, but like the humility and the ability to take feedback, right? Like everyone will say that they can take feedback, but then when they actually get, some very kindly structured but critical feedback, right? A lot of people just explode.
Are you talking sandwiches in the business term?
Yes, the sandwich. You give this, you do all the things you're supposed to do to give the feedback, but in a team environment, you have to give feedback because the team has to succeed, right?
Yeah. We all know they're sandwiches and everyone knows what I'm referring to, but I won't say it. Oh, the other question that I remember we talked about this previously last week, or when we last had a conversation, politics. Do you think companies should get involved in politics, or do you think they should stay out of it?
I think that is a to each their own. I think that that's probably the easiest way. We tend to try to stay a little out of it, but at the same time, we are in the oil and gas industry, which has a certain political color to it. So we play in that space, and that's fine. And we will play whatever game we need to, and we will be successful in the space. But I think in terms of like bringing it in too much, it's like, well, what's the goal that you're trying to achieve, right? And does it fuel the goal, or is it going to distract from the goal? And like if as a company it's going to fuel your goal, I think it makes sense to really bring it in and embrace it. In our situation, I don't think it would really fuel the goal. So we're just going to keep going.
Perfect. And we are just coming towards the end of the interview, which is really sad because I'm enjoying this conversation so much. You're really interesting to talk to. But the last question that I always ask is, there are other people out there maybe who wanting to become entrepreneurs, or maybe they have a bit of self-doubt, or they're not sure if they're ready. What advice would you give to someone who's in the early stages, having had the experience that you've had?
Yeah, in the early stages, like definitely the knowing yourself. So if you have any doubts, you go do some of these, like go do the Myers-Briggs and the strong interest, assessments. You could probably find them online. Maybe have like talk to some people about how they like kind of line up. And if that lines up, that like you really should be an entrepreneur, like own that. Right. But if it doesn't line up that way, like that's okay too. And then find something, maybe you would enjoy working in a startup, but you don't want to be on the sharp end, right? Like there's other ways that you can get that excitement without having to be on the sharp end, and that's okay.
Great advice, Vicki. Look, I want to say thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's so fun.